First, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to Doctors Laura King and, of course, Jordan Booker for the invitation to sit on this particular panel. If I was to summarize what I wanted to say today, it would be probably in the words that are in italics, the recognition of the work of several generations of African-American personality psychology, personality researchers will enrich and increase the precision of our understanding of human personality. I look forward to our discussion of this particular topic. Really, 5 rounds I wanted to cover today, and that's not any reference to a boxing match. But first, I want to talk a little bit about a boogeyman that was introduced to me in graduate school, and then about a prophecy that was made some 50 years ago to the American Psychological Association. Some quick statements about the status of African American thought in personality psychology, and then some comments on the recent catastrophes that we've experienced and how they sort of bring up this boogeyman again. And then, of course, the last part would be avenues for repair and how we can make things better. All right, so round 1, by way of introduction, who is the boogeyman? Thinking now of the chair of the Department of Psychology at University of Illinois when I was a graduate student there, was a social psychologist named Joseph McGrath. And he talked about the idea of individual differences in responding as the great boogeyman of stress research. All right, that what he was suggesting is that because of the individual differences, we would see wide variations in responding from one participant to the next in terms of our laboratory manipulations or in terms of what they encountered in the real world. We should expect sort of smallish effect sizes for our manipulated experimental variables because of these individual differences. And even in very carefully controlled studies, the measured responses might be somewhat noisy. Of course, personality psychology is up to this challenge. Salvador Matti always taught us years and years ago about the core and the peripheral statements that theories of personality make. And the peripheral statements describe features of personality that are influenced by one's experience, have sort of a circumscribed influence on our actions. They don't influence everything, but they influence some things. And they explain differences among people that include concrete styles of life that differ from one person to the next. All right. I still find this Matti's work in theories is a very, very impressive achievement with this. All right. But here we were to save the day, where the social psychologist saw the boogeyman. Personality psychologists found sort of a familiar, if rugged, terrain. All right. One subarea's noise and error variance is another's music and melody. All right. Well, we would subdue this troublesome phantom, this boogeyman, because we had a rich tradition of multi-level descriptions of human nature. Individual differences and even individual uniqueness never really was a source of intimidation for the personality psychologist. Rich experimental and correlational research traditions add to the understanding of human differences. And of course, the precision of measurement is increased within a strong psychometric tradition, that was always part of personality psychology. To us, the boogeyman appears less formidable. All right. That's round 1. Round 2. 1967, an invitation was advanced to a speaker, and the invitation came from the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues and from Milton Rokeach. The speaker said this. This is somewhat of a redacted version because I've changed some things. I didn't want to give away who had said these things. The new radical trends are appearing in Black thought. I use radical in its broad sense to refer to reading into roots. African Americans have become aware of the deeper causes and the crudity and cruelty that govern white society's response to their needs. They discovered that their plight is not a consequence of superficial prejudice, but was systematic. All right. And this is the unredacted version of that statement. You can find the entire address in the American Psychologist, March 1968. And of course, everyone knows that. In fact, this is an address that was given by Dr. Martin Luther King the year before his death to the American Psychological Association. He was giving a prophecy that a new and radical tradition of African American thinkers was on the horizon. Of course, this particular tradition is described in detail by Cedric Robinson in his book, Black Marxism, and he links it all the way back to the earliest responses to oppression in this hemisphere. All right. Dr. Curtis Banks, who taught personality psychology at Howard University until his death, talked about some aspects of this tradition, and he said that in the within Black psychology, really 3 schools that he talked about, but in a possible 4th school would arise. And he talked about a Reconstructionistic school, where these new thinkers would talk about the ones that Dr. King had warned about, would talk about modifying and revising traditional psychology, what was going on in traditional psychology. A deconstructionistic school, which is basically criticize and debunk traditional products, and a constructionistic school, which would develop sort of a new African-centered approach to psychology. The professional school, the old school, simply said, simply do good science and everything will work out in terms of the products that are produced. All right. In the wake of Dr. King's predictions, and in following Dr. Banks' statements, we've had 50 years of work. 2 new journals that we could identify quite readily would be the Journal of Black Psychology, Cultural Diversity and Ethnic Minority Psychology, numerous edited volumes in Black psychology, texts of every stripe on oppression, culture, education, and African Americans. And then there was a unique story that I just want to mention, the Cobb and Henry story, Cobb and Henry Press, which was really the work of Reginald Jones, who edited the first issue of first edition of Black Psychology and several other editions. This is the 4th edition that I have sort of centered here, but he edited close to 20 books in the area of Black psychology. All right. And that's round 2. Round 3, what has been the impact of this radical tradition on the mainstream, especially in personality psychology? All right. African-American thought, I think, in terms of what we've seen, merits at best brief allusions within personality thought. Failure to break through at a basic level of personality pedagogy has been the rule, the order of the day. And the textbooks were sort of the contributions of African-American psychologists sort of relegated to boxes and inserts. All right. But, and they're largely ignored at the graduate level. People of color, basically an afterthought in personality psychology. And maybe that's the reason for our seminar today. We do learn about Allport studies of prejudice, but we learn nothing or less about Dr. Du Bois's Atlanta Youth Studies of Racism and the American Scene, and Dr. Du Bois's notions of the spirit and the souls of African-American people. It's pretty much ignored. Frantz Fanon's living critiques of Freud, Adler, and Jung, basically neglected in most of our pedagogy and personality. European theories, according to Fanon, were of limited utility because they missed the mark when exploring the psyche of colonized people. Constructionistic Black psychologists, people like Kobe Cambone, Dawudi Azibo, Wade Nobles, Naeem Akbar, they talk of the self and the strivings of in an African framework, pretty much invisible to mainstream personality work. Linda James Myers, we hear too little of Linda James Myers and Cheryl Grills and their studies of the nature of African consciousness and values. Edward Bruce Bynum's studies of explores the earliest workings of the human mind and the roots of what he calls the African unconscious, or the human unconscious. Again, not really made much of in our traditional pedagogy. And of course, Dr. Cynthia Winston with her narrative studies of significant life events among African Americans. Again, we hear too little from these individuals. So when we go to the cupboard, in terms of the cupboard control that contains thoughts about African psychology and African personality and this area, what we find is the cupboard is almost bare on 2 levels. The field has produced only dribs and drabs of African-American behavioral scientists, primarily of the professional class in personality areas. And there's a strong lineage of critical thinking that has not been forthcoming. from the traditional training models. At the second level of where the cupboard is bare is in terms of the products. Basically, the neglected thinking of African personality theorists. And although there's some aging, identity, and cultural measures out there, again, not a lot of this there. The failure to produce an arsenal of instruments that measure singular individual differences among African Americans. All right, that's been a second contribution to the cupboard being buried. And it also contributes to sort of the unfulfilled promise of confronting the bogeyman of research, certainly in the stress areas, but in other areas in African American data. All right. We ran on the year of 2020, a year that we will not forget, where catastrophe became normal, that we saw in this year a reemergence of the bogeyman, the effects of persistent killings of unarmed Black people, one scourge that we faced, the effects of a pandemic on people all over the world, the effects of the neo-fascist turn that the United States has taken, or was taking, and the effects of that on voting and critical responses of African people. All of these events call for a close analysis of individual differences. Who's most affected, who responds in what particular fashion. All right. But what we find is that the question still remains, are there critical peripheral characteristics arising out of Black life that account for differences in responding to the events like the ones we've encountered in 2020? And this asks us to go beyond just simply measures of race identity or cultural orientation. What critical causal person dimensions are formed in the crucible of multi-level racism that vacillates from subtle to vulgar? What do we have there? The knock at midnight asks us those questions. All right. What we know is that the peripheral characteristics, all right, to understand the peripheral characteristics in people of African descent in this country, it means more than just simply the study of psychology. We have to study cultural, social, psychological context, history, and the impact of production on individual. All these impact the production of individual differences. Personality theory must be open to drawing on work from a panoply of disciplines to understand how individual differences are sculpted. Right? Work something like this. To understand the peripheral individual differences, we have to understand one's genetic contribution to these. We have to understand, in addition to that, sort of proximal environmental events, one's psychosocial history, but also the cultural input, the cultural matrix that people are in, as well as macro historical events, processes, and context. All of these contribute to these individual differences. If we understand these, we'll do a better job of measuring them. That what is needed then on the team studying these individual differences would be geneticists, cultural anthropologists, historians, and African American studies or African studies specialists. All right. How do we get to this point? The round 5, toward repair and correctives. No doubt that the Black radical intellectual tradition will continue regardless of what personality research does. All right, but the central question is this, and the core question for this symposium is, will mainstream psychological training sites make significant contributions to this critical tradition? What will be the face of personality psychology in the future? All right, chicken or egg? Students will gravitate toward mentors who share their perspectives and background. Openness to critical and radical perspectives will attract African American researchers to personality psychology. All right, which will come first? The students being attracted to this area and broadening the perspective, or will the perspective have to broaden in order to attract the students? Chronology becomes the issue here. I think it's going to work something along these lines. And we have to broaden disciplinary perspective, increase the number of tenured African American faculty, increase the mentor-student pairings as we do that, and then continue to broaden the disciplinary perspectives. The broadening of the discipline, that's work at the level of the journals and the professional societies. Must broaden what we consider to be the normal discourse within personality. We have to make sure that we increase the number of tenured African-American faculties. Not just one and done either, not just those who come and are the only one in the department, but those the promotion and tenure would be granted to teams of these individuals to make it, and these are of course structural, but to make the environment more hospitable. Recruitment and nurturing of inquisitive students, always part of the process, but they're out there. And of course, empirical products that produce journals and meetings that will continue to stimulate and inspire students. All right, so summation of my correctives, we have to explode Western academic hegemony found in journals and research societies and welcome more than just simply the professional class of students, those who sort of just simply want to do good work. We need to do good work. We want individuals who will do good work, but also involve themselves in critical analyses of what's going on. Cultural and historically informed research programs will explore the source of individual differences in responses. These culturally and historically informed research teams will be interdisciplinary. They will, in fact, help us find the boogeyman and sort of expose the source of these individual differences. Unconstrained interdisciplinary collaboration is what is needed in order for personality psychology to explore some of the differences we're talking about. And then, of course, to facilitate mentor-student pairings, the departments must interrogate the tenure process and ending the one-and-done hiring practices that we see in so many institutions today. Thank you very much.